Hello, hello, hello. It's Pastor Shemi, also known as Sheoke, also known as Olua Shemi Lore Tunji Akintunde Chukube Chuku Joshua. Let me talk to you. Welcome to episode 1 of this podcast. I'm really excited about this. Glad to have you here. Excited about this journey. I know for the past couple of months, maybe even years, I have been quite silent and quite scarce in terms of the music. But that has been because of the direction the Spirit of God has been leading me in terms of the things, His plans, His purposes, His will for my life. But we'll get into that. We'll get into that. Trust me. And I'm just excited to be here. That is why this podcast is here. That's why we're having these discussions. And on this platform, we're going to be talking about a lot, right? Just some of the things we'll be discussing, for example, is serving God with your youth, serving God with the strength of your youth. In this world and this day and age that we live in, many people have it backwards. At times, I speak to many young people and I bring them the gospel and I preach the gospel to them. And sometimes you meet people that say, hey, I'm young. I want to live my life, whatever that means, right? I want to live my life and I want to do what I want to do. And then when I'm done living my life, then I'll settle down and then I'll, serve God. But that's kind of backwards, Firstly, there is no life outside Christ. There is no life outside God, outside the very one that created you. So how do you live your life without God? Not possible. And what better way to serve God than with the strength of your youth? We'll be discussing following God's will and purpose, no matter the cost, Sometimes God's plan or His purpose for you, it does come with sacrifices. It does come at a cost. It comes at a cost of self. It comes at a cost of your own personal desires at times and what you want. And it becomes more about what does God want? What does God want of you? We'll also be discussing having fun, having fun, enjoying life in Christ on God's terms, not on our terms, but on God's terms, and fulfilling purpose, a very important thing, fulfilling purpose and walking in preordained paths. And, even just on that topic of purpose and walking in preordained paths, I believe that has genuinely been the testimony of my life. The testimony of my life has been one of grace and predestination. If God were to choose anyone to use for anything really, based on certain things, and if we were to look and see the way man sees, really, I personally wouldn't even choose me. I wouldn't choose me. But that's a testament of God's grace, God's love, His kindness, just being able to live the life and purpose that He has for me. It's truly one that I do not take for granted. And maybe you're here and you're watching this and that's been your testimony too. And we're going to navigate some of those things right here on this podcast, There's so much that God wants to do through each and every one of us. He works with each and every one of us in such a unique way. He has a specific plan and purpose for all of us in the kingdom and in the body of Christ. No one doesn't have purpose. No one is useless. No one was born without a reason. Every one of us, every one of His creation was born with a purpose, and life begins when you discover that purpose, or at least begin the journey of discovering that purpose. When you begin to walk in that and you begin that journey, that's when life begins. That's when the beauty, the joy of life truly begins. Anything outside of purpose is a wasted life. And we're going to be discussing some of those topics. We're going to be navigating that together, and I'm really looking forward to it. Glad to have you here. And so like I said, today we'll be talking about music, right? As you see, the caption is, why did I quit music? And in order to really understand why in the first place did I stop making music, I think it's beneficial for us to go all the way back, right? We have to start from the genesis, right? Why did I start making music in the first place? So the story all begins decades and decades ago. Bear with me, right? It all makes sense. Growing up, I grew up a PK. And if you don't know what a PK is, that's a pastor's kid. I grew up in a Christian household, in a ministry and a church that truly practices Christianity, where you see there's an emphasis on the word of God. You see there's an emphasis on the demonstration of the power of God, the miraculous. I grew up watching Atmosphere for Miracles. I grew up attending programs like Night of Bliss, Crusades, where I would see people rise up from wheelchairs. I'd see blind eyes open, the deaf hear. And, being a pastor's kid, there was always this perception. There was always this, well, I guess I can call it pressure to be a certain way, to live a certain kind of life, to fit a certain mold and uphold a certain standard. And I'd be lying if I sat here and I said that wasn't, an interesting, very interesting dynamic or interesting environment to grow up in and to balance. It was, you were in this sort of weird place where it's like other people, of course, as young people, they grow up, they go through, young people, and when I say this is not supposed to be the norm, but young people in the world, they grow up and they go through motions, they go through certain phases of life. And almost as a PK, as a pastor's kid, they test you, right? It's like you have this stereotypical pastor's kids that end up living a life that is not remotely close to the call of God upon their life. But I feel like people, when you're growing up, they're like, hey, do we know, how do we, this pastor's kid, are we going to test him and say, hey, you're a PK, you can't do these things that we do, or can you? And there's that thing as a child, is like, hey, oh, me too, I can hang. But there was that, maybe people don't understand, unless you're a PK, you don't know what it's like to grow up as a pastor's kid. You don't know what that feels like, where it's almost like, wow, didn't think I would talk about some of these things, but where it's almost like you share your parents with the world, or at least with a lot of people, Of course, being older and wiser now and being a pastor myself, there's a lot more that I understand, and I really know. Amazing. Look, my father, amazing. I can't thank God enough for the things and the way that he raised me and all that he did for me. But then as a child, it's like, man, like you're sharing your parents with other people. I even remember once vividly, and I might jump a bit in this story because there are quite a bit different elements to the story and different parts, but they all come together in some way. I remember once as a young boy, I remember it was a midweek service. It was a Wednesday service. And I remember being so excited because I loved, driving in the car with my dad. I loved when he would pick me from school. It excited me. I felt proud, like, hey, that's my dad. And I remember once it was a Wednesday service. After the service, it was time for us to leave home. Of course, even as the pastor's kid, it's like first to arrive, almost last to leave. So now it's time to go home. I remember rushing downstairs. I got into the front seat of the car. I was excited. It was my daddy was in that BMW, yeah, favorite car. So it was, and then I remember he came down and he was like, oh, please, so-and-so is going to take you home because I need to take so-and-so home. And it was like he needed this individual. It was a lady, a young lady who Well, I won't get into much of a story because that's not really why we're here. But I just remember that day I wept. I wept like a baby. And for me, it was just like, yo, like, why don't I get to go home with my dad? Why doesn't he get to take me home? Why don't I get to be taken home by him? Why am I sort of relegated to someone else having to take me home? Of course, I was a child, very childish thoughts. But at the time, some of these things were what got to me. I grew up a very shy individual, right? Shy. I grew up very insecure with a lot of insecurities and with a huge desire to fit in with people. Some of the things that contributed to this was losing my mother. Well, I won't say losing, but the passing of my mother at a very young age. I was 7 years old when my mother passed on to glory. I mentioned earlier that I grew up in a church where I witnessed the miraculous. I witnessed the awesome manifestation of God's presence, power, glory. So as a young person and not understanding certain things, it was something that made me question a bit, to be like, yo, but if all of these things are happening, how come this person who was very committed in church, who believes in God so much, who served, who has lived such an amazing life in service of God, how come they didn't get healed? And that caused a bit of confusion for me as a young boy, not understanding certain things. So I grew up a bit insecure, grew up feeling a bit empty. You know, I'm sure, as you can imagine, for a 7-year-old boy to lose, not to lose, I repeat, because I don't lose, right? I never lose. But as a 7-year-old boy to not have his mother at that age, it definitely did have a bit of an impact. Not a bit, it had a whole lot of impact. I won't even lie to you. Let me not sugarcoat it. It had a great impact. It was something that affected me very deeply, and it's something no one could understand what that feels like unless you go through it. And of course, God forbid that anyone should go through that. But it left what I would say at the time, and we're going somewhere, right? It left a hole. It left a gap that just felt like nothing could fill this gap. There was this emptiness that was felt, where there was so much that I questioned, and every little thing, every situation, circumstance, there was always that thing at the back of my mind, like, man, like, if she was still here, would this be happening? Would that be happening? And at some point, it even put me into a very deep state of depression, where I just, I had just moved quite a bit. As I said, I grew up a pastor's kid, so I moved from place to place, never really. So I was very quick to switch friends, never had like long standing friends. It was like, oh, you move from this place, you're used to, okay, if my dad's moved, you pack up, you leave, no goodbyes. It's like, okay, moving to another place, make new friends, forget about the old ones. Then, of course, in between that, mother passed on. Then, in quick succession from her passing on, my dad got transferred to South Africa from Lagos, Nigeria. So now in a whole new country, different environment, different culture, and came here during the height of what's called xenophobia, like the first phase. And I'm in KZN, right, which is a very cultural place where it was very rife. Of course, no, don't get me wrong. I grew up in privilege. Don't get that twisted. So I wasn't affected directly by xenophobia in such a way that you say, oh, no one was chasing me. I didn't experience any violence. But what I did experience was banter, what one might call banter, right? So, of course, in high school, well, from primary school, actually, I was in grade 7 when I moved here, or when I moved to Durban, KZN. And, you'd hear the jokes. It's like, hey, sometimes using some offensive slurs, some words that were not so nice, not so kind. So there was this longing to belong. It's like, firstly, I'm already working against so much. I'm a foreigner in this place, or a foreigner in a land at the height where people are not for the most part, there's this general displeasure or distaste towards foreigners. Not only that, I'm a pastor's kid, so there's also that added interesting part where people at school are joking about certain things, like, hey man, yeah, you're going to the tuck shop to buy food, and people are like, hey, you're eating the church's money, hey, you're using the offering to buy food. And it's just like, bruh, what did I do? So there was a genuine sense to belong, is the point of this, right? It was tough for me making friends. I was at this point now a bit socially awkward, didn't know how to speak to people. As I said, different culture, whole new place. So I'm trying to find myself, trying to find my footing. And one of the things that I was able to relate to certain people on was music. Music was a common ground that I found with certain people right from high school. I used to latch on to things and use things to create a pseudo identity. I remember even the first time that I ever started getting into fashion, right? Of course, now I love dressing up. I like to look good. But the first time I got into fashion or dressing up was simply because I remember once I went, there was this girl that I had a crush on in church. Just hold on, let me finish, right? But there was this girl I had a crush on in church, and I remember we had like prayers or rehearsals or something on a Saturday, and I came and she was like, oh wow, you look really nice, like you look really good, I like the shirt and the jeans combo. From that day I was like, whoa, okay, so you mean if I dress well, drip is going to get me in? So I let that become, like my whole identity. It was like, okay, cool. So since I'm getting this compliment because of how I dress, it's like, okay, so I'm going to work on the fashion. I'm going to work on looking better, dressing better, because it was this like confidence boost for me, because I craved affirmation. I craved, whatever you want to call it, from external things, right? And that was one of the things that the music did for me as well, right? It was like, okay, you're this cool guy, and we created friendships. There were certain friendships, certain bonds that were created based on music. And even more so when I got into varsity, and it's like, okay, there are different kinds of people, like not everyone's the same, because in high school there's that herd and that herd mindset, group think, everyone's kind of more or less the same and afraid to be different. But I get to varsity and it's like, okay, so there are different kinds of people, not everyone's just like the mainstream. And then I found my little clique, I found my people. It's like, oh yeah, we even listen to like different kinds of music. We don't like the commercial stuff. We don't listen to the top 100, all of that. Nah, bro. We listen to we have specific taste, niche type of taste, because we're different, bro. We're different. So created certain friendships on the basis of that. Mind you, at this point, so that of course led from one thing to another, which I'm wondering how much we should get into here, because it is quite interesting. But yeah, led to one thing on another, one thing led to another. Started doing certain things or taking part in some recreational activities that that I shouldn't have taken part in. Started hanging out with certain kinds of people, and it was an interesting dynamic because in university I was cool, but I wasn't cool. If there's a difference. There's like the cool kids, and then there are those that are like, oh yeah, I mean, you can hang, but you're not all the way with us. Because I mean, there were certain things like that came with being cool. Like, I don't want to sit and have empty conversations, talk about, like, as much as I was a cool kid and I had veered very much off the path that I was supposed to be on. I was still, I mean, I believe that there were still certain things or certain places where it's like, okay, I draw the line here. Like, cool. Like, I may dabble, I may toe the line, but not all the way in. So there's certain things that I still, for me, just didn't seem so fulfilling. Like, I don't want to sit and talk with a bunch of guys about, oh, I slept with this one, oh, this were my escapades this weekend. That wasn't really necessarily my thing. But so I was cool, but not really cool. And of course, with being in varsity, you come to this place. I grew up a very, I guess you can, to an extent, call it a sheltered life, a protected life, where it was like, hey, you can't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Of course, that only made me want to do it more. And even as a young boy in high school, there's some things that I did that I should not have done. I remember would sneak, hey, whoever watches this, to my elders that watch this, I'm very sorry. And I promise, we thank God. As I said earlier, my story is a story of grace, and we thank God. But even in high school, because I had sideburns, right? I had sideburns. So that meant that I looked older than I should have. So I would be the one that was sent to buy juice, right? Yeah, sometimes we'll go to the mall and we'll drink juice, you know. But yeah, so I get to university, that came with wanting to try certain things out, going to certain events, going to certain functions, doing certain things that I shouldn't have, trying certain things that I shouldn't have, fooling around with certain things, Um, and I remember at some point there there was a turning point where I would do these things, but I would just feel empty. Like there was no fulfillment because I was searching for fulfillment in things that could never bring satisfaction or fulfillment. Sometimes it was in going to places, going to events, and each time I'd just be like, man, like I leave here kind of empty, like there's nothing nice about it. Sometimes it would be with special friends, and it's like, nah, but this is okay. After all is said and done, and this is the interesting thing, after all is said and done, when you're left alone, when you're sober, just you and your thoughts, do you enjoy yourself? And I mean, like, do you enjoy your own thoughts? Do you enjoy being in just your own skin? And at some point, I realized that I really didn't. Everything else was empty, and there was this emptiness and this void that just couldn't be filled with everything. And at this point in my walk of faith, what was going on, I think in my first year of varsity, I probably did not attend church service even once. If I did, it was once. The only times that I did attend was when I would go visit my friend, the highly esteemed Pastor Carlton. When I'd go visit him, of course, I was in his house, so would go to church together. But besides that, when I was on campus, I wouldn't go to church. I wouldn't attend anything. I would be out. I mean, there were parties on Sunday too, bruh. There were parties on Sunday too. So, and of course, if I was partying Saturday night, I'm sleeping in. I need rest. I need to recharge for Sunday. It's going down Sunday evening. So, yeah. But at this point, I was starting to come to the realization that, just as the Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. The good thing was I did have a solid foundation. I did have that foundation. There were things that were instilled in me, even though, you see, with my father, he's not really someone who, he doesn't force, he doesn't pressure, but there were certain things that he made sure he was like, nope, there's no choice, there's no option. For example, going to church growing up was never an option, never a negotiation. Don't matter if you have an exam the whole week, next week, doesn't matter. You'll go to church, you'll go to morning prayers, you'll attend the programs, you'll be involved. Doesn't matter what you say, doesn't care. And that's good, because then at some point I started to think to myself, I've been searching everywhere else. I've tried everything, but I haven't tried God. Maybe I should go back to my roots. Maybe I should go back to what I know and what I grew up on. And I remember at this time, I had a very special friend, a very, very special friend. Take it to mean whatever you want it to mean, but she was my special friend. Now, this special friend, she was Christian, and she began to ask me some hard questions. She began to make me think about certain things that I had not thought about. At this point, I was young, doing certain things, not really taking much thought to certain things. And I remember she once asked me, she was like, "Hey, have you ever prayed about this? Have you ever prayed about us? Have you ever thought about or considered, like, what does God want?" And I remember at that point, I sat there and I thought to myself, and I was like, this made me for the first time think to myself, I actually haven't really considered for a lot of things and for any other aspect of my life, like, okay, what is God's will and purpose for my life? What is his will and purpose for my life? But it was a thought I kind of brushed off and just continued in it, like, yeah, sure, and kept towing the line, going back and forth, in and out, almost saying we're Christians, but not necessarily behaving like Christians. And I remember once, like, it was very serious, it was something, always, I'd never really believed in dating for the sake of dating, right? It was like, oh, if you're dating, it's for the purpose of marriage. That's the idea I always had. That's why there's certain things it's like, no, I'm not just gonna date someone for the sake of it, but it's like, oh, there's purpose to this. So I remember would do this thing where we'd do like a questionnaire. It was like from a marriage book and pre-marriage questionnaire. It's like, oh, okay, are we gonna have separate bank accounts? The kids gonna be homeschooled or go to boarding school? Who's gonna pay the bills? Is it gonna be 50-50, this, that? And I remember once we then got to the topic of the discussion of church, like, what church do we attend? And I remember I was like, hey, that's a no-brainer, bruh. That's a no-brainer. You're going to my church, duh, because there's no ways I was going to leave where I am because I know I'm in the right place. I may have been foolish at the time, but I was wise enough to know that, look, the ministry that I'm in is exactly where I need to be. There's nowhere, I didn't know anything else. There's nowhere else I was looking for anything. I knew that I was born and raised, Love World Nation, Love World Gang, like Pastor Chris generation. There's nowhere else I'm going, right? And then she was like, right, mind you, so at this time, remember I said earlier that I was like, oh, let me go back to my roots. So I started getting more involved in church. I started attending. And of course, being a PK, like, there's no ways that you can just attend and just sit down. Like, it's in you, it's inherent that you're going to want to get involved because that's just how I'd been raised, like, being involved in church, different departments, always being active, volunteering. So God started getting involved. So when it was like, oh, what church are we going to go to? It's like, no, we're going to my church. I'm committed there. I was born and raised there. I'm involved there. And she's like, look, but bro, I'm also involved in my church. I'm committed in my church. I love my church. And it's like, okay, can we find a common ground? Like, can we go and look for a church that then we both like and we both want to be in? And for me, it was like, nah, bro, like, I'm going to my church. Like, my church is the church, and it is a place to be. And then she was like, look, okay, well, this is a topic that's very important, or a subject that is very important, almost like a make or break. And I was like, I agree, because I'm not going to go anywhere. And if you're not willing to come to my church, I'm not going to marry someone or be in a family where we go to two separate churches, because, like, we're hearing two different messages. You believe one thing, I believe another thing. Or what if our doctrines clash and collide? What do we believe? How do we raise our kids that way? So it was like, okay, cool. So if we can't agree on this, then why are we doing this? There's no point in us doing it. So it ended. And then I remember this was just before we were about to write exams. So now we go on and we start writing exams. And then after exams, just before I go home for the holidays, now mind you, at this point, my dad's been transferred again. Now he's in Cameroon, Douala, Cameroon. So right before I'm going home, she's going home. It's like, oh, can we meet up? Can I see you? Say bye. So we meet up. And she asked me an important question again. She's like, so what are we gonna do? Like, what's gonna happen? And then she asked me, she's like, have you actually prayed about this? And I'm like, to be honest, I haven't. I haven't prayed about this at all. It isn't something that I've given much thought to in prayer. So she's like, over this holidays, I want you to pray about this and then get back to me so we know what we're doing, how we're moving forward. Because unless you have that confirmation in your spirit, then we're just wasting our time. So I decided when I went on that holiday, or that it was our summer break, I was like, look, actually, for the first time, I'm going to give this to God in prayer. And I remember at the end of the year in church, we always do a 3-day fast to round up the year. I remember those 3 days were fasting, praying, and I was doing it with some of my friends, Philip, Pastor Carlton, Pastor Benjamin, Pastor Folami. We're praying together. And I remember there was a time where I was praying just on my own, and I was giving it some time to pray, and the Lord said something very striking to me, because I was asking him, I was like, Lord, like at this point, I've never really heard on God on a lot of things. Maybe I had heard the voice of God or heard God or hadn't, but I can't be sure, right? But I'm like, okay, Lord, is she the one? Is this my future wife? And I remember clearly, this would probably be the first time that I remember vividly and clearly, like I knew God spoke to me. And he was like, you're asking the wrong question. You're asking if she's the one, but are you the one? And I remember I was like, I knew for a fact that I wasn't. And then he said more. It was like, how do you expect? He reminded me, and it all happened so fast. When God talks to you, sometimes like it can be a matter of minutes, but you hear so much. And it was like, look, in the concept of marriage, the man is the head of the house and he's leading the wife. And he's like, how do you expect to lead someone if you yourself don't even know where you're going? I was like, wow, that's deep, because at this time I was still trying to figure out myself, my purpose, my direction, and I had no idea what my purpose was. It was all just like taking it one day at a time, just living life. Just living life is like, oh, I'll go to school, study, get my degree, okay, go to church. But what does God want from me? What does God expect of me? What are his dreams? What's his will, his purpose? Like, what direction does he want my life to go in? I can't lie to you. I'd be lying to you if I said I knew that at the time. So I was like, oh, there's my answer. Like, it's not so much that he closed with this. He was like, you need to work on becoming, right? You need to work on becoming the one. It's not about her. What are the things that you need to work on in your life? So from that moment, I was like, okay, I'm making this definite decision that things need to change in my life. There are things that I had been doing. There's a way I had been living that wasn't really a reflection of the life and nature of God that was in me. And from that day, I made a decision that things needed to change. So yeah, that was a very a major turning point for me. I think this has been a lot for one episode, a lot to digest. So we'll talk more. Definitely excited for this journey. Glad to share some of these things, some of the things that I'm talking about on here in front of a camera. It's very interesting. Stuff that maybe I don't know that I thought I would share such a thing on a platform like this. And but hey, here to be open. It's called Let Me Talk to You, right? Of course, this is just the introduction, and it won't always be me telling you my life story. But yeah, glad to have you along. And part 2 coming, episode 2, where we will get into more of, some specific turning points in my life that really, really then got me on the path that I am now, and how I even got into making music in the first place. But you understand the linkage very soon. Episode 2, you understand how all of what I've said so far links to me then getting into music. Thank you for tuning in to this first episode. Let me talk to you. And I'll see you next week on episode 2. God bless you and goodbye.